Hello, I'm Jyotika. Welcome back to Excelling Psychology. I'm continuing with the lesson on solving past paper 2, and we are using the May-June 2022 paper as an example on how to solve this paper. Today I'm starting off with section B. I've already covered section A in parts 1, 2 and 3. That is, I've covered from questions 1 to question 6. I'll link those videos in the description box below, so you can visit them if you're looking for answers to section A, or you could visit my playlist A-Level Psychology and you'll find the videos there. Okay, so beginning with this class, as always, first I'll read out question 7. Jeffrey is conducting structured interviews about people's use of social media. He's investigating how much time people spend on social media and how positive they feel about it. Okay, like I've told you, always read the question deeply, not at a surface level. So firstly, we note that Jeffrey has used the research method of structured interview. When we think this way, it orients us towards, it primes us or prepares us towards thinking about the named methods and the named variables. Okay, so firstly we note that he's used structured interviews and he studied two variables, time spent on social media and the feeling towards spending that time. Okay, so keeping this in mind, we read the question. Jeffrey finds that the time participants spend on social media is normally distributed. They want us to sketch the shape of this normal distribution using the axis below. You must label the axis. Okay, and it's a 3 marks question. So 3 marks question, clearly I'm sure you must have understood the breakdown of the marks. First mark you'll get for drawing the correct shape. Second mark you will get for labeling the x-axis correctly. And third mark you will get for labeling the y-axis correctly. What is the normal distribution? I'll give you a quick revision. Normal distribution is the bell-shaped distribution, which represents the distribution of any variable in the population. So any psychological variable, how it exists in the population. Here, like they've told us, time spent on social media is the variable. So I'll just abbreviate it as time on social media. When I say that time spent on social media is normally distributed, what I mean is that whatever is the average of time spent on social media, say 2 hours on an average, people spend on social media. What I'm saying is most people spend 2 hours. So if we were to survey all the people in the population, what we would find is most of them are spending 2 hours on social media, and then decreasingly lesser people are spending much more than 2 hours on social media, and decreasingly lesser people are spending much less than 2 hours on social media. So that's what a normal distribution is. On the normal distribution, always on the x-axis we have the variable of interest. So x-axis always has the variable, because of course at the bottom we need to show which variable we are discussing. Y-axis, like I just told you, we are talking about how many people, most of them do this, less number of people do this. So of course we are talking about frequencies. So y-axis will always represent frequency in a normal distribution. So that's all we have to do. It's a 3 mark question, but it's very straightforward because we are getting 3 marks for just naming different things. We don't have to explain anything in this answer. Okay, so for my first mark, I will first draw out the normal distribution. How well you can draw is of no significance when you're answering this type of a question. So do not be concerned about such things. Okay, then I'll label the x-axis first. I will, like I told, the variable must come on the x-axis. So I'll write time participants spend on social media. On the y-axis, like I told you, what I have to represent is frequency. And I can just mark the point 0, not compulsory. Okay, nothing much more to discuss about this answer except for a couple of things. What you need to make sure is firstly your ends of the normal distribution must not touch the x-axis. Okay, normal distribution never touches the x-axis because there's always a probability of finding somebody in the population who's spending much more or much less time than we have estimated. Okay, so conceptually the normal distribution cannot touch the x-axis. Whatever I'm writing in purple, like I told you earlier, is for your understanding. What I've written in blue is how you have to answer the question. Okay, so make sure of this. And the other thing you need to make sure is that the peak of the distribution should be at the center, because most people are on an average, irrespective of how good or how bad your drawing is. If these two things are in place, you will get full marks, which is 1 mark for the shape. Okay, so that is for this answer. Let's move on to the next one. Jeffrey finds that some participants give interesting responses, but he does not explore their use of social media further. We have already noted that the research method is structured interview. So of course, even if he finds something interesting, there is no way that he can explore it further by virtue of definition of structured interview. Okay, let's read further. Explain one practical reason why using a structured interview means that Jeffrey cannot explore these participants' use of social media further. Now, what they've started doing in the paper is clearly demarcating between practical and ethical reasons, because somehow students have this tendency of discussing ethical issues primarily everywhere. I don't know why. So, whenever they say practical reason, they mean in relation to the research method used. Okay, research method uses what? Structured interview. So keeping that in mind, we need to answer this type of a question. So we have to give a practical reason why Jeffrey could not explore those interesting answers further. This is a 2 marks question. So 1 mark we'll get for naming the practical reason. Second we'll get for connecting to the study, as always. Okay, structured interview. I hope you remember structured interviews well. They have a fixed number of questions to be asked. Exactly the questions to be asked are fixed, that is, their wording is fixed. So each and every participant is asked exactly the same questions, and the sequence or order of questions is also fixed, right? So all these aspects are fixed. By fixed, what we mean is these all are pre-decided or predetermined, so there's no way that the interviewer can make a change to any of these. So that is what we need to discuss in general. Then making it specific to Jeffrey's study, all we need to say is that although he found some interesting responses, he cannot ask any further questions because he's not using an unstructured or semi-structured interview that would give him permission to explore further. Okay, let's see how to write this answer. So we'll begin with structured interviews. Involve using a fixed number of questions, fixed sequence, and fixed wording. Therefore, Jeffrey cannot add any more questions to the fixed ones, even if he finds some responses interesting. Okay, so we get 1 mark for in general specifying what is that practical aspect of the structured interview which does not allow us to probe further, and second for linking it to Jeffrey's study. Okay, so again a straightforward question. Let's come to the next one. Okay, explain one ethical reason why Jeffrey may choose not to explore these participants' use of social media further. So like I was just telling you, practical and ethical specifiers have been added so that students don't end up giving the incorrect type of answer. So that's good. The clarity of question wording has been increased with time. Okay. Whenever there's any question in relation to ethics, you simply have to go through all the ethical guidelines in your mind. Okay, so you have the ethical guidelines for human participants. I think there are 8 of them, starting from informed consent and ending with confidentiality. Whatever order you have learned the ethical guidelines, just go through your mind, consider which ones will be applicable here. So informed consent, right to withdraw, all that have nothing to do with this question. The first one, which is related to the nature of this question, is privacy. And when it comes to self-report, this tends to be the major ethical concern. Besides that, we could also take up protection from harm. That is also relevant in this case. Okay, because there is some emotional or psychological discomfort when it comes to discussing personal issues. So we could take either one. Again, stick to one. Like I told you in the previous class, do not go in for a breadth of responses, go in for a depth of a response. I'll explain both to you, but we'll write only one. So one I'll explain to you orally how you could have presented here. Besides this, I cannot think of any ethical guideline that is relevant here. If you can, you could add that as well. One thing to note before we answer this question has been asked for 3 marks. Now typically the pattern we have been following is 1, we would name the ethical guideline, 2, we would link it to the study. But here we have to do one more thing. We have to present some details. Okay, so we have to provide some further explanation, because it's for 3 marks. Otherwise, we won't be able to justify these 3 marks. So that is why we've been always noting how many marks have been allotted to some question. Okay. I'll take up privacy first and I'll explain to you orally. Why privacy is a concern here is because many activities performed on social media tend to be private. So many of these participants or interviewees might be doing things on social media that they do not want to disclose to others. We could present some examples of these, such as they might be sharing some of their posts, like you have on Facebook or those social media platforms. They might be sharing some of the posts only to their friends, not to the public. So they might be using restricted privacy on social media. So since they're not sharing these things with public, they might not want to share with the researcher as well. So telling the researcher, about details of how they use social media would mean having to share their private posts or their private information, which they have as it is not given to the public with the researcher, which could be challenging for them. Otherwise, also like on social media, we know people tend to use abusive language, or they tend to discuss secrets with each other. So participants might not want to share any of these with the researcher. So that's how we could explain privacy. Protection from harm is also related to privacy in this case, but if we are discussing this one, we need to put our focus on the harm aspect, not on the privacy aspect. So we will link it, but we'll indicate how that could cause harm or emotional discomfort to the participant. What we could discuss here is that since participants tend to have a lot of private information being shared on social media, so having to discuss that with the researcher would make them very uncomfortable. So they might feel pressurized to answer, because one of the features we have learned of an interview is that the presence of the interviewer matters a lot. So it can become an ethical concern also, because participants might believe that if the researcher has asked them something, even if they know about their right to withdraw, they may feel that they have to answer that question. How to refuse someone who's asking a question on the face. Okay, so we could discuss such things if we are talking about protection from harm. Right now I'm taking up the issue of privacy and writing my answer because that is the most relevant when it comes to an interview. So I would say that Jeffrey might violate the guideline of privacy by exploring Participants' use of social media. Further, people tend to share personal information on social media which they may not wish to discuss with the researcher. For example, they may share information about their family matters, anything immoral or illegal, etc., that they have done. Okay, normally we do not elaborate so much, but because this is for 3 marks, we have elaborated by presenting examples. So 1 mark I get for naming the issue, 2 mark I get, second mark I get for making it relevant to the study that has been presented, and the 3rd mark I get for elaborating further, that's providing more details. I've explained exactly what I mean by personal information in the 3rd point. So I've illustrated it with examples. So I get my 3rd mark for that. Okay, with that we have completed this sheet, that is question 7. Let's move on to the next question, question 8. 𝗬𝗨𝗬𝗬𝗧 is investigating teachers' attitude and behaviors towards students doodling. She has conducted a semi-structured interview and has observed the teachers in the classroom. Okay, so far what we are understanding is, this is a good perspective, a different perspective they've given here. In the Android doodling study, we saw how students like doodling and it can help them from being distracted in the class. But what about the teachers? The teachers might find it disturbing to see their students doodling as they are teaching. Okay, so that's interesting. Besides that, coming back to the point, 𝗬𝗨𝗬𝗬𝗧 has used a semi-structured interview and an observation. So she has combined 2 research methods. Let's see what they want us to discuss here. They are saying 𝗬𝗨𝗬𝗬𝗧 asks each teacher to rate how annoyed they feel when a student in their class doodles. Okay. So 𝗬𝗨𝗬𝗬𝗬𝗧 has used rating method, right? Rating scales. I hope you remember this from questionnaires and data analysis, what rating scales are. So 𝗬𝗨𝗬𝗬𝗧 has used a rating scale. Suggest a scale that 𝗬𝗨𝗬𝗬𝗧 could use to measure how annoyed the teachers are. Now, what do they mean by suggest a scale? What they mean is we need to actually present those numerical values. Okay, a rating scale always has some numbers which symbolize or stand for some response that we are expecting from participants. So we have to present those numerical values, 1. Second, we have to present what those numerical values represent or stand for. Okay. The mistake students make in answering these type of questions is simply present the numerical values, not what the values represent. That's a grave mistake. See, it is for 1 mark, but just presenting numbers does not make any sense. So your answer has to have meaning to it. Okay, so numerical values, the typical ones are 1 to 5. I can present that, but what sense does it make if I just write 1 to 5? I need to indicate what 1 stands for and what 5 stands for. So make sure you write a complete answer. Okay, how we can write the answer is scale. Okay, so first I'll just present the scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You could write 1 to 5 or 1 dot 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 5. That is also fine. The key thing is to indicate what the numbers represent. So I'll say with 1 representing not at all annoyed and 5 representing very annoyed or completely annoyed. Okay, this is very important. One thing you need to keep in mind when you're writing this answer is use the wording which is in the question. Okay, don't change the wording. So you can see I've used the word annoyed. See, self-reports are direct question answers. So the researcher, if he wants to study annoyance, he will be using the word annoyance. Don't change that word to angry or irritated or disturbed, and don't input anything of your own that way. Stick to the wording given to the question in the question. This I've told you earlier also, so keep it in mind for these type of questions as well. Okay, let's come to the next question now. We are continuing with the same scenario. Explain one problem with the scale that you've suggested in 1A1, including how this would affect results. Okay. Rating scales. What are the problems of rating scales? First thing in general, what you have learned. Of course, limited range. Participants might want to suggest something even more extreme annoyance or something which they don't have permission to. Since the scale is very limited, it's presenting them only with 5 options. That's one. Another is it is way too objective. Objectivity is a strength, but it does not leave room for scope, for finding more about a response. So we could talk about limited scope. If a participant has selected 5 out of 5, why? Or if he selected 1 out of 5, why? What is so annoying or what is so not annoying? We don't get details that way. Okay, another could be that participants might show social desirability. I think that is one of the favorite responses of students. They love to discuss social desirability. Okay, here how social desirability would be seen is that teachers might indicate that they have no problem with doodling at all because it makes them appear like very supportive of students and very permissive. So that's why they might, easily just give a lesser value on how annoyed they are. If it was an interview, instead they would have to explain why they are suggesting something. So there they were less likely to present a socially desirable answer. Okay, besides that, there could be a problem of misunderstanding or misinterpretation. Okay, like the wording, we are saying it's ranging from not at all annoyed to completely annoyed. So when we present a rating scale like this, teachers might not relate with what extent we are indicating by the numbers. So when we are saying not at all annoyed, what do we mean by that? Like, it does not bother them at all, or even mild annoyance can be indicated with 1. And when we are saying completely annoyed, does it mean very, very extremely annoyed, or to a moderate degree? Even the in-between numbers could be confusing for teachers. So what does 2 mean, or 3 mean, 4 mean? Okay, so those kinds of misinterpretation. Let's see how many marks this question is for. It's for 2 marks. So 1 for naming any of these issues, as always. Second for connecting it with the scenario given. Okay, as of now, I'll take up the first problem, limited range, and this is what I'll discuss here. Okay, so I'll say one problem is the limited range of responses. Okay, so limited range of response provided Okay, next we have to suggest how this would affect the results. Okay, again keep the wording of the question in mind while answering. This would affect results as if the teachers wanted to indicate a more or less extreme response than the scale permits, they would not be able to do so thus lowering validity of the findings. Okay, because if participants have something in mind, they are not able to truthfully express it. So we are saying that validity is lowered. Okay, so this is about question 8. There is more to this question, so let's move on. Question 8b, we have 𝗤𝗨𝗬𝗖𝗛𝗍𝗏, continuing with the same example. 𝗤𝗨𝗬𝗧𝗏 is interested to know whether teachers should show same behaviors in the classroom when students doodle as they reported during the interview. Okay, we already saw in the beginning that she conducted an observation as well as an interview. Or a rating scale. I forgot. Okay. Whatever it is, she did conduct an observation as we noted in the beginning. So why did she conduct it? Becoming clear here, she wanted to see whether teachers are responding honestly on the scale or not. So she wanted like a cross verification. Now what they've asked is to suggest 2 reasons why the teachers' interview responses may differ from their behavior in the classroom. Your answer should not relate to the scale you suggested. They are not telling you that it need not relate to the scale. They are saying it should not relate to the scale which you have presented. So don't talk about how objective the scale is and, like we just discussed limited range. You can't discuss why range would be limited on the scale, but in the classroom teachers could show a wide variety of behaviors. They've strictly told us not to answer that way. Though those answers are correct, but right now they're looking for more variety in our answers. Okay, so let's think about it. Let alone teachers, you can think in general, why might a person report something else on an interview and behave something else actually? I know again the first thing that will come to your mind as students is social desirability. Yes, you can discuss that. Okay, so on the scale, because it's a self-report method, very directly they could understand what impression they are creating by selecting a certain answer. So they might have misreported on the scale deliberately to create a favorable impression. Whereas in the classroom, when it comes to observation, they tend to show what they really feel. That time they are not in control. And since 𝗤𝗨𝗬𝗧𝗏 is studying in the classroom in a real setting, this is a field observation. So the teachers might not even be aware that they are being observed. So they might have not had any opportunity to change their behavior to make it look favorable. Okay, besides that, a lot of times when it comes to self-report, people are genuinely unaware of how they behave. Okay, so there's something what we would say unawareness. Okay, when we report some things on self-report, we are being honest on our part, but we don't realize that, lack of realization or lack of insight, we could say. We don't realize how we tend to behave really. So it might be the case with these teachers also. So they might feel they're very forgiving of students who are doodling, or it does not bother them if they're doodling. But in reality, their disturbance might be very visible on their face, which they are not realizing. So that could be one reason. Besides that, I really can't think of much. It could be a problem with the research method also. In the sense, not research method as much as research design. Like, teachers might be in different states when they have been subject to different studies. Okay, so when they were interviewed, that time say they were in a good mood, so they indicated that they were not annoyed by certain behaviors of students, but when they were observed that time, they were in a poor mood. So this is the issue of participant variables which keep fluctuating. Okay, or it could be the other way around. When they answered the rating scale, that time they were very disturbed, and later on they were fine with, when they were being observed, that time their mood was good. So that could come in the way. Definitely, if we are doing two different studies. Let me think of anything else. Okay, it could also be situational variables for that matter. You know, it could be that when the teacher answered the interview, till then she's not had an experience of students, doodling too much, or in a very distracting way. Like till the point of time the interview was taken, students that she's been exposed to might be just doodling once in a way kind of thing. So it's never bothered her. But after the interview took place, since the observation is taking place later, she might have come across some students at the time the observation was taking place who were doodling very fanatically or in a very distracting manner, like not paying attention to the class at all and just doodling in the class time. So it might have been a first experience for her to have this kind of an annoying doodling which she's never had earlier. So because of the new experience, she wasn't able to report it when she was being interviewed. Okay, so there are multiple things we could discuss. I'm sure more than these also. Let me just take up the first two ones and show you how to answer. It's a 4 marks question. So 1 mark will go for naming the first issue, second for connecting the first issue. Right? I'm sure you've understood the pattern. So this is to do with first issue, and then the 3rd mark comes for naming the second issue, and 4th mark for connecting the second issue to the study. It's an easy question again. Okay. So I'll begin with the first one. I'll name the reason first. Social desirability is one reason. Since the questions on the self-report were very obvious, teachers might have indicated that they do not get annoyed to show they are sporting. Okay, again I don't have space, so I'll write at the bottom. Or that they get annoyed to show they are strict, whereas during observation they must have acted according to their real responses. Okay, one mistake students would make here, so I'll point it out immediately. To talk only about, say, till year. Till year. Social desirability, and then not talking about how observation differs. See, if they're asking you to compare two methods, like self-report and observation, so interview and observation, right? Talk about both in your response. So talk what would have happened during the interview and what must have happened during the observation, both. Don't skip one. Okay, so directly compare both methods. As for marks, 1 mark we get for naming the issue, and 2nd mark we get, as always, for connecting it with the study. Okay, we have to indicate one more issue, so we'll present that also. Lack of insight is another reason. At the time of reporting annoyance to the researcher, teachers might not realize truly how annoyed doodling makes them feel. But during observation, okay, again check that I'm linking it with observation. During observation, they may unknowingly reveal their true feelings. Okay, there's one more question here. If 𝗬𝗨 finds that teachers do not show the same behaviors in the classroom as they report during the interview, this raises an ethical issue. Suggest why it would be difficult for 𝗬𝗨 to follow the ethical guideline of protection from harm when she explains her results to the participants. When she explains her results, when do we explain results to participants? At the time of debriefing, right? So they are talking about what would happen during debriefing. Now what would happen is, you can imagine the scene in your mind. 𝗬𝗨 would explain the results to them and they would feel very uncomfortable knowing that they have behaved in contradictory ways. So they've reported something else about their same behavior on the interview, and then they have acted out a different way when they were being observed. So that is the psychological harm that is being caused. So that is what we have to talk about, the contradiction. If you want, you could also talk about feeling cheated, which always comes in. If any kind of deception has been done or any kind of revealing of behavior, like we had seen, this is directly connected with Milgram's study. It is not so much about deception, I'm sorry, but it's more about, realizing that like the participants in that study realized that they thought they were much less obedient than they actually were. So that made them very uncomfortable. So that realization is difficult to bear. It makes the participant feel very like a person who cannot stand up for what he really is, and that might get converted into anger towards the researcher, and so he might have this view out of the frustration he's feeling that the researcher has tricked him or cheated him in some way, and had he known that this is going to be the case, he would have not allowed the researcher to observe him. So you can talk about that also, but since it's just a 1-mark question, I think we should just keep it as simple as we can. Okay, so we'll just talk about the contradiction that participants experience here. So what we'll say is that teachers could feel embarrassed or ashamed for having contradicted themselves in the study, which could make them experience psychological harm thereby breaking the guideline. Okay, so we have completed, I think, question 8b as well. I'll just check. Yes, so we have completed the entire question 8. We have to continue with question 9, which I'll do in the next part. So see you then.